Shall we kick off, Helena?
Yeah, let's start. Hi everyone, I'd like to welcome you to our second webinar in the series looking at Passivhaus for the public sector. So this afternoon we're looking at delivering low carbon buildings at scale with a particular focus on St Sidwell's Point Leisure Centre and in Exeter. I suppose today we're joined by Tomas Gaertner, who's a RIBA Chartered Architect and Passivhaus certifier, accredited by the Passivhaus Institute in Germany, where he specialises in human-centred, healthy and high-performance design. As a certified building biology consultant and a Passivhaus designer, he works collaboratively with design teams across the UK. Over the last 18 years, he's been involved in numerous Passivhaus projects, helping to deliver multi-residential offices, schools, higher education, buildings for worship, fire stations, care and swimming pool and leisure building projects. So pretty much every type of building we can think of. And he's joined by Emma Osmundsen, who's played a pivotal role in the popularisation of Passivhaus in the UK, and very much behind and spearheading Exeter City Council, I suppose, pioneering Passivhaus programme, both for housing and for the UK's first Passivhaus certified leisure centre and pool, which we're going to look at in more detail today. Emma is currently Assistant Director of Housing Regeneration for the London Borough of Ealing, and is a chartered surveyor with over 25 years extensive experience working in development roles for various local authorities. She's rightly described as a Passivhaus pioneer and has really championed the Passivhaus standard and delivery of buildings to that standard, with a basically driven by delivery of buildings that enhance the well-being of the occupants and contribute to the preservation of the planet and generate wealth for all and mitigate fuel poverty. So I'll hand over to the double act that we have today with Tomas and Emma, and they will bring us through their experience and in Exeter in St Iddel's. Thanks very much.
Great, thanks, Helena. Good afternoon, everybody. Really great to see everybody, and thank you for joining Tomas and I. And as Helena said, we're going to be undertaking this as a bit of a double act. So we've got one slide set, and hopefully Tomas is going to share it with us. And we can give you a bit of insight in terms of the journey that we took, going back a few years now, in terms of delivering St Sidwell's Point. So we're going to give you a gander through our journey for delivering the UK's first certified Passivhaus leisure centre. It was a 12-year journey, but you'll be pleased that we're not going to take you through all the thrills and spills of that. But I think it's worth giving a bit of context in terms of how we came to be developing a Passivhaus leisure centre in Exeter. And that was really off the back of the fact that we'd been developing social housing to the Passivhaus standard since 2008. That's indeed how Tomas and I met. And we've had the privilege, well, I've had the privilege, I'm not sure he'll say the same, of working alongside each other since then. For this particular project, St Sidwell's Point was an important project that was really aimed at creating a new destination development at the city centre. It was intended to replace an existing bus station. You can see on the photograph here, this is the old bus station. And we were utilising some of the coach layover space to develop a new leisure centre. But it was to be forming part of a much wider mixed-use development working with the Crown Estate. But a bit more on that a bit later. So we wanted to bring forward a leisure facility that was very much part of supporting our evening and weekend economy. Lots of city centres have become a little hollowed out with retail parks moving out of the town and the like. So we wanted to make sure that we could provide a leisure facility that would entice people in, particularly in the evenings, after work hours and at weekends. And so our design brief was partly to consolidate two other leisure facilities that are also based in the city centre. We had quite aged post-war swimming pool just down the road, and we also had some dry side sports just around the corner at Clifton Hill. And the plan was to basically consolidate the facilities in those buildings add some more to it within a new facility here at St Sidwell's Point. It also enabled us to get some capital receipt from those sites, so that all helped to enhance the overall business case for this building. So in terms of, what was our ask? Well, we very much worked with leisure specialists in order to shape the kind of optimum accommodation mix for this building, knowing that quite typically for public sector leisure facilities, swimming pools tend to be the cash cows and quite often reliant on the dry side and gym facilities to provide that cross subsidy. So for this particular facility, we were looking to replace an older 25-metre swimming pool with a new one. We also wanted to provide additional community facilities in terms of a community pool and a children's play water area. The dry side sports was very important as part of that cross-subsidy model. So we wanted 150 station fitness gym, lots of studios for yoga classes and the like. And then that would be supplemented with a cafe, which was relatively modest in size because this was meant to be part of a wider mixed use development that would provide lots more eating and restaurant options. And then finally, we were pretty keen from day one to provide spa facilities, again, opening up that wider leisure offer, which typically you might not necessarily see, particularly in a public sector facility. So what was critical to the client's brief was that we wanted this facility to very much meet the triple bottom line performance criteria by being both environmentally responsible and socially responsible, but also being financially responsible. So meeting the public purse, addressing people, but also addressing how we impacted the planet. We had a very stringent environmental brief for this particular building. So we wanted it to be low energy, particularly in terms of targeting at least a 70% reduction in energy and low water usage. We wanted the building to be climate ready. So we typically, for all our council housing projects, we're building to probabilistic weather file data that looked for the lifetime of the building, so at least till 2080. And we wanted the building to be healthy, with a focus particularly on air quality, water quality, and the overall comfort of the building. But the original client brief was the building was not to be passive house. That wasn't entirely my doing, but it was certainly the position of the senior leadership team within the council and many of the councillors. And this was despite the fact that at this point, Exeter had been developing passive house social housing probably for nearly 10 years. And so they had gleaned quite a lot of experience and confidence from a passive house standard. But the council were very much risk adverse, and they were concerned that whilst Passive House had been adopted for a small number of projects across the UK, from a mainly residential and domestic perspective, it hadn't really been adopted for many large-scale commercial projects. And they certainly didn't want to be one of the first to test it on this pretty expensive project at that time. So our original brief was to set these aspirational environmental standards, but to align that with more established national standards that existed at that time. So in this case, it was very much linked to the BREEAM standard. And of course, back in 2022, when we were starting to construct this building, Passive House was still quite marginal in the UK. We're now just about gone through the 1% of all projects in the UK being certified Passive House, and we've got ambitions to get that up to 10. But certainly when we were looking at the inception of this project, which was many years previous to when we started on site, there were very few passive house buildings.
Right. One of the key drivers to adopt passive house for this project was actually when we looked at the business case. And we looked at the business case together with the leisure consultant, the same leisure consultant who advised on the facility mix, to to optimize the economic performance of this building. A key driver for this new facility was, at the same time, of course, to provide a high quality facility for the people of Exeter. But at the same time, the council, of course, realized from their existing 3 pools that generally swimming pool buildings need financial contribution from the public purse. These public swimming pools, none of them, or generally in the UK, typically don't bring back the revenue to sort of maintain themselves. So a key aspect is here is not so much that to turn these into money makers for a council, but minimize the costs for a council. And one aspect is, of course, the facility mix. There are some facilities in there that bring in revenue, like, for example, fitness elements in there as well, some of the cafe elements in there as well, and these kind of things. But another aspect we wanted to explore when we looked at the energy reduction was actually how can we reduce the costs of running a pool? And here, high energy buildings like swimming pools, they offer a massive opportunity for Passivhaus buildings. The first Passivhaus swimming pools were completed at the time, back in 2010, and were operating in Germany, and were successfully operating at a 70% reduced energy demand. And that created a massive opportunity in here. As you can see on this graph here, this was the sort of concept design for the St. Citrus Point project if it would have been built to building regulation requirements at the time. And the big energy costs in here that one can see is for the heating, ventilation, and for the hot water filtration element in there, which make, on a, when you look at the overall cost, operational cost of a swimming pool, they make almost about sort of a third, typically, the energy cost of the running costs of the pool. If you can reduce this successfully, it means that without having to increase footfall, you can increase your profitability by reducing these running costs. We compared that at the time if we would be building this pool to a Passivhaus swimming pool standard. And as you can see in here, there is an uplift in cost, of course, which is the grey bit in there at the bottom, but we can drastically reduce our heating, ventilation, and especially the hot water and filtration element in that. And when comparing these two, the building regulation proposal or the Passivhaus proposal, it would have resulted in a 70% reduced running costs according to this model, and by that reduce our operational costs for that pool and create a payback. This was then fed back into the business plan, and this made in the end the decision for Exeter City Council to go for Passivhaus. So it was as strong a sustainable, environmentally conscious driver, the commitment from Exeter City Council to reduce the carbon emissions of their assets, but at the same time, it was also a financial aspect, an economic driver for this particular type of pool buildings.
But our journey for Passivhaus, particularly for St. Sidwell's, started really 10 years ahead of us actually getting diggers on site and starting the build. And what was really critical, I guess, to the adoption of Passivhaus was firstly, for some of the project team to visit 2 of the first German Passivhaus pools, which we did back in 2011. And then once we'd got the concept agreed in principle that we were going to go down looking towards a Passivhaus route, we then took some senior councillors and senior members of the leadership team of the council on a tour of those leisure facilities in Germany at Bamberg, where there's a brand new multi-sports, multi-water and spa centre at Bambados. And then at Lippibad, where there had been an existing building that had been converted and a new swimming pool put in. There were very limited dry facilities for that. Now, it was those visits, particularly with councillors and senior officers from the council, that proved really decisive in getting the buy-in. And that buy-in came not so much, I guess, from the technical learning and the lessons learned that the operators and the project deliverers shared with us at those visits, but it was really the first opportunity that people could experience what Passivhaus felt like within the context of a leisure centre. Obviously, we were quite familiar from a domestic residential perspective, but actually feeling Passivhaus and how Passivhaus kind of operates in a leisure setting was a lot different. And I would certainly say that visiting these facilities was really the game changer for getting that political drive and the political champion for adopting Passivhaus. And the great thing, of course, now is we had to go to Germany, which was a mild inconvenience, although many of us certainly enjoyed it. These days, we've got some Passivhaus certified leisure centres across the UK, and indeed, I think you're having one under construction at the moment in Exeter. So there's real opportunities for you to come and visit, and again, take the trouble to experience the internal environment, the differential in terms of comfort, and the overall enhancement in terms of the acoustics and the air quality that really gives you a much strengthened motivation for wanting to build a Passivhaus.
And this is also was important for the design development, experience these pool environments, and also for the design team to understand, especially designers who weren't involved with Passivhaus before, who weren't involved with the indoor environment qualities of a Passivhaus before, and what the client was trying to achieve with this building here. And visiting these pools in Germany was an eye-opener, because swimming pools in Germany are used differently to the UK. Whereas in the UK, swimming pools or these facilities are quite functional buildings. You go there for sport and exercise, you swim your lanes, you disappear again, more or less. Whereas swimming pools in Germany are designed as an all-day experience. You go there in the morning, you do your sport, your fitness, you do your swimming, your lanes, but then you also relax in these. There are facilities in the pool hall, for example, where you have restaurants and cafes there as well. You have lounges there. You have play equipment extensive for kids, so they can sort of play around there all day. You then have sauna and spa connected to it, so that essentially most people who go, they make a day out of it or half a day and spend their time in there. So there's a completely different demand in terms of the quality of environment that you need to achieve. Whereas in the UK, in most pools, nobody would dream of spending 6 to 8 hours in a pool hall environment with the chemicals and everything in there. In Germany, this is perfectly possible, and especially we found this with these Passivhaus swimming pools here and the quality that these pools achieved. But this is not just to do with the technical aspects, it is also to do, of course, how these pools are arranged and how it impact on the design to optimize this performance in there as well. And when it came to the Passivhaus design, the most challenging was actually not the technical detailing of Passivhaus or how we ventilate these buildings. The most challenging bit about this was actually the fact that with this building being a Passivhaus, we wanted to turn that round. All swimming pools in the UK are typically north-facing. And they're north-facing because one wants to avoid glare and overheating. Whereas a Passivhaus swimming pool, we want to make use of the solar gains, even more so than in sort of a residential or office environment or these kind of experiences, because a Passivhaus swimming pool with high internal temperature levels and in the UK climate needs heating almost all year round. These solar gains are beneficial all year round because we have an indoor environment of 28 to 30 degrees, and we'll always have, most of the time, beneficial solar heat gains from these areas. So we want to make use of these actually. And so the first step was when we worked with the designers to turn the building round and have it south-facing. And this was something that was alien to them, to say the least, and felt the most resistant. People were concerned about solar glare, of course, on the water surface, which is a real risk that needs to be addressed. But people were also, designers were concerned about occupants, users getting a heat stroke from getting hit by the sun with swimming in the swimming pool. We took them to Germany. These pools are south-facing. They had a swim. We brought them all back safely. We had no casualties there. First design team meetings, we had the same resistance. It's something that is not done in the UK. And we had to prove to them that we can make it work, extensive modeling as well in terms of surface temperatures and things like that, how we can control the glare on the inside. And when you come to St. Sidwell's Point, you will see internal fins. I'll show you a picture of that possibly later on, where you see internal glass fins, more like internal louvers, and they are designed to direct the sunlight against the ceiling so it doesn't hit that water surface in there, so that we can control that solar gains in these kind of areas. But at the same time, with these swimming pool buildings, it's because you have a multi-zone. So you have some areas of that building that are 30 degrees, others like the fitness and gym areas that are that need some cooling, especially during summer, which are at 14 to 16 degrees. You have these different temperature zones within one building. So you don't have to just sort of act on the external environment. You also have to control heat losses inside the building and within different zones. And the easiest way of doing that is to essentially order your zones and your different occupation accommodation within that building based on temperature levels, so that you don't have cooling zones right next to heating zones. And that gives you sort of like a stratification through these buildings in there, that we're from one side, on the south facing side, we have our swimming pools at 28 and 30 degrees and the sauna element sort of at that level. We then have our buffer zones, which are our changing areas at 24 degrees. We then have our internal access areas, offices, these kind of things at 18 to 20 degrees, and then our cooled areas on the north facade within that building, where we have the fitness and gym facing the north elevation, so it's protected from the sun, but also we can better control internal heat gain. So it added a level of complexity to the floor plan layout at the same time. At the same time, you want to reduce your distribution losses within these kind of buildings. So it's where normal swimming pools quite often have one big plant room at the far end of the swimming pool somewhere, so that you can put your sand filters in there. That means that you have long distribution, both in terms of your hot water, your filtration systems, but also your ventilation systems, which have to come through all your building where you have additional losses. St. Sidwell's Point has 13 plant rooms. They're all dotted around, relatively small, smallish, throughout the different areas, so that we can have always the plant, the ventilation, and the hot water plant that we need for these particular areas relatively close by, and we can reduce the distances and internal losses there as well. So again, it added some more complexity during the initial design stage, but which then achieved improvements later on and made the job easier later on in that game. The reason why St. Sidwell's Point looks a little bit like its footprint and the curved shapes and some of the complexity that you find in there is because it was part of a larger development. It was part of a larger retail development, and St. Sidwell's Point, Exeter City Council were essentially given a plot, a leftover plot more or less, at the edge of that development, which for commercial viability was less interesting for the retail users in that instance. But with the retail development further developing, that spot got smaller and smaller and smaller. And what you see here in terms of St. Sidwell's Point footprint is the actual site. That's the site we were given. And then we had to start to stack up as well, because the site got smaller and smaller because the retail user needed that site. And this informed the design essentially at the same time, together with trying to bring this to Passivhaus level. Then a key aspect was engaging with the construction market. Passivhaus was relatively new to the market, and especially when we looked at commercial or leisure buildings. There were no other leisure buildings at the time built to that kind of standard. And from experience, we already knew that even for multi-residential buildings or even school buildings, the market was not as keen on these type of projects and quite risk averse for it. At the time when this project was tendered in 2014, 2016, at the time, quite a few of the major contractors had burned their fingers already on Passivhaus and made some losses on some of these projects. So there was some awareness of this. So the client actively engaged with them contractors through pre-tender workshops. And this is to get buy-in, to familiarize the contractors with the process, give them some reassurance that these designs is not something where Passivhaus just specified or a contract requirement, but that this building has been designed with the intent to meet Passivhaus standard, that we had experts involved on this, not just experienced Passivhaus designers, but also working with the Passivhaus Institute in Germany, who have been working on the 2 pools in Germany before, and who brought that experience to the project and were engaged in the review of these kind of projects there as well. To make this, to de-risk the project for contractors, sort of enhance their understanding of it, the sequencing, the actual risk that is involved with these kind of projects, to allow them to more accurately estimate it and hopefully create some interest in that market. We also then relatively early on developed these supermodels of key junction details there as well, so that they get their head around how these the facade and everything is to be brought together on this building, but then also have the sequencing, but then also some subcontractor and expert training throughout that process.
And notwithstanding all that sort of upfront investment and work with contractors, engaging with the contractors was still very much a challenge. We ended up going through 2 full ODU procurement tender cycles. Certainly by the second tender route, we were paying contractors to submit tenders through a 2-stage tender process. And even when we got to the end of that, the second and successful tender procurement route, we selected Kier as our preferred contractor, and literally on the day of contract signature, they then refused to take the Passivhaus certification risk. And so as a client, Exeter City Council had to retain the design responsibility for the airtightness and also the Passivhaus design strategy. That wasn't such a problem for us because we'd been familiar working with the standard for a decade before that in a residential basis. And in many respects, when the building was completed, we took a real pride in the fact that it did receive its certification with relative ease. So after it was built, the build program took us through COVID as well. So we had the challenges of that and the additional program and cost constraints. We did actually successfully deliver the project now. That's 4 years ago this month. We finished the building and it's been open that time period. And I think what's really fascinating is that our original business case for the project was based on 500,000 visitors per year. And certainly within our first year of opening, and since then, we've now exceeded 1.3 million visits per year to that facility. So in many respects, we've outperformed our original business case, and it really has excelled all expectations. I was in the facility this morning. I was doing swam my mile, and then I took the lift up to the spa. And the building is performing as well today, probably if not better than it was when we first opened, because we've gone through all those trials and tribulations of getting the M&E systems all balanced and working. And it's a real testament just to see how many people are using the facility and really enjoying it and coming back time and time again. And from a client's perspective, I mean, these give you a bit of an insight in terms of some of the internal shots. We really wanted to ensure that we priced these facilities at an affordable level. So the gym and swim packages are the cheapest across the city when compared to private facilities. And we see a real cross-section of society that are using the facilities, well frequented by clubs and as well as university students, and of course by having a real cross-section of facilities as well as children creche facilities. We've got ages from probably minus 6 months old through to 90 years plus. So what Thomas and I now want to focus on is kind of what has changed, what have we learnt, what would we do differently if we had the privilege of bringing forward another Passivhaus pool. So I think looking at what's changed since we finished St Sidwell's over 4 years ago, is that in many respects the world began to catch up with us, and certainly some of our environmental credentials that were the bedrock of the client's brief now are becoming much more commonplace, certainly in public sector buildings. So we've seen that over the course of time, obviously building standards have improved and increasingly are edging closer and closer to the Passive House standard. And this is particularly true in areas such as central London, where we've got the London Plan, which has got more onerous energy efficiency levels. But also we've seen greater adoption, for example, in Wales and Scotland, where whilst building standards are improving and getting close to Passive House, we're seeing that a lot of grant funding conditions and government funding conditions are linked to performance outcomes. We've also, I guess, at a more personal level, experienced firsthand the impacts of climate change. And certainly in terms of the public sector and from a commissioning perspective, we've seen a real shift in policy and a greater commitment for public buildings to really address climate change and offer some climate change mitigation measures. And the great thing about that is that Passive House and using the PHPP, a Passive House Planning Package software, really builds in that resilience for a degree of climate resilience, particularly with regard to designing against solar heat gain and overheating. We've also seen over time that the supply chain has really matured. We've got more products and services and therefore much greater competitiveness in the marketplace. And therefore we have seen a reduction in costs, albeit of course building cost inflation has continued to rise year in, year out, certainly since we finished this development. But we're certainly seeing many more Passive House buildings and projects coming forward. Certainly they've continued from a residential perspective, but we've seen many commercial projects now delivered to the Passive House standard. So that has really given a degree of confidence in the marketplace, and we're seeing a lot more proactivity from contractors wanting to adopt the standard. Because we've got more and more projects completed, we've got much more track records and lessons learnt in terms of projects that have completed. I know that with my Passivhaus Trust hat on, we've got lots of case studies that really outline the strengths, the benefits and the lessons learnt. Also picking up some of the weaknesses in terms of what we've learnt in the process. And we're also seeing a much larger pool of evidence that we've gathered from completed Passive House buildings. There's a real rich seam of information, particularly with educational buildings and increasingly now from a residential perspective. So there's lots more post-monitoring evidence available. And of course, overall, the business case for Passive House has strengthened. We've seen a greater impact of climate change. Of course, we've got an energy crisis, and we've now seen a shift, particularly with new buildings, towards a greater focus on health and well-being. And particularly in England, we've seen the introduction of specific new standards specifically to address mold, damp and building health issues. So I talked about contractors becoming a little bit more switched on to Passive House. Certainly we've seen a definite shift from when we first entertained Passive House with the market with St Sidwell's, and increasingly we're seeing contractors actually coming forward and being proactive and offering clients, perhaps on buildings that weren't intended to be Passive House, to look at adopting Passive House as part of their overall delivery solutions. And this, as a consequence, has meant that contractors are now realising that there's greater client demand for the standard, so therefore there's greater commercial opportunity for them. And I think also we're seeing that, particularly in London and in large cities, increasing instability and stresses relating to energy networks And increasingly contractors are coming forward with Passivhaus as a solution to mitigate some of those risks.
But there are also still some issues around Passivhaus that still remain. Passivhaus remains still quite niche, although the market has grown, although more and more clients have adopting it. Also, the scale of Passivhaus project has grown significantly in the UK. When you look at the overall construction activity in the UK, it's still only a very small part of the construction market in the UK. There remains a continued misunderstanding of Passivhaus, what it can bring, a misrepresentation on some projects as well we found in the past. And there are also some of the Passivhaus myths, which sort of are still inherent in terms of when it comes to overheating, when it comes to ventilation of these kind of buildings, also when it comes to other factors about that. Another aspect is still true for Passivhaus is that the costs of Passivhaus are on the rise with inflation on all projects. But we found that quite a few projects we've been involved with, the tenders we got back from contractors, they suggest that Passivhaus elements actually rose above inflation rates on some of these projects. This is sometimes to do with a risk perception from contractors. It sometimes has to do with overcomplicated designs as well, and risk-averse design teams applying belt and braces to projects based on maybe struggles, challenges from past projects, not falling into the same trap, rather than engineering these solutions to optimizing them. And government policy in response to the energy crisis has been more reactive rather than proactive in these kind of areas. It is more that we have an issue that we have to address, that we have to fix in these kind of areas and as well, and it needs a quick fix in there, which has impacted the delivery or the rise of Passivhaus at the same time. Now, what we've learned from the sort of last 15 years, 16 years developing Passivhaus homes and buildings in Exeter. Our key takeaways, our 4 key takeaways is that first, simplicity is key. So the key thing here is that we want to minimize the sort of impact from Passivhaus on the construction sequencing, but also the delivery of a project. So that means in terms of the program, but also in terms of the different supply chain members involved, we want to minimize that impact, and that by, first of all, keeping the design and specification as simple as possible. Clearly identify the areas that need upgrading, where we need to do things differently to achieve the Passivhaus standard and achieve this impact on the comfort, the air quality, but also the energy demand and health and well-being of the occupants of that building, and which are the ones where we have to improve on these. Isolate these, identify these, and then make sure that these elements are implemented as simple as possible in there to then also help contractors be less familiar with it, but also to achieve these standards, minimize the on-cost of these elements by having a majority of standard construction products, but also processes ideally on site, but then also allowing for these isolated elements to be managed appropriately on site and with less impact on the overall program. Minimize the number of specialist Passivhaus activities on site. We want to isolate them to certain, and if we can isolate them to certain aspects of the building, but also to certain times of the delivery period, then the contractor and on-site team, they can focus on these areas and deal with these. If it is ingrained into each and every process throughout, and the contractor and subcontractors and suppliers constantly get involved with specialist aspects of that design, it creates a risk perception for them, but also it impacts on their sequencing and their program again, because with the unfamiliar processes, there's always more risk of things potentially going wrong, delaying processes on site. Here, off-site production can help, prefabrication can help solutions as well to move some of these products or processes from site into a factory environment, for example, and that can also then allow for a better quality that is maintained and cost competitiveness of these elements. Upscaling is key to optimize Passivhaus benefits and ensure viability. Larger buildings, larger developments are typically easier to achieve the standard in there. There's less pressure on these as well, and also in terms of the process on there. And many projects in the UK that have come up in the last 4 or 5 years demonstrate that as well, that it is possible to develop passive house at these levels and to economic by the standards. And the cost-effective passive house solutions come from experienced passive house design teams. If you have an experienced passive house design team, passive house designer on board who has been through that process before, who has worked on these projects before, who's worked with contractors before, they can give the reassurance for delivering cost-effective passive house to them as well. But also, if things go wrong, can help steer contractors and design teams on site. But there are also things that still need dealing with. One, education, training, experience for designers and consultants need to accelerate at pace. More passive house knowledge needs to be provided. Same to designers, but also to trades on site. To get familiar with the standard, what it needs to deliver passive house, and then also, again, to reduce that risk perception of passive house. More post-completion evaluation and monitoring is critical to maintain the confidence in passive house standard. Only through build projects we can demonstrate that passive house performs, not just in terms of the energy demand and what happens at the end of the year on paper, essentially in terms of how much energy we have used when compared to a standard building, but also in terms of the quality environment. So people, clients, but also the public can experience passive house performance when it comes to air quality, when it comes to comfort, when it comes to the acoustic performance of these buildings. Here, St. Sidwell's Point is a particularly good example because it's one of the few publicly accessible passive house buildings in the UK, where everyone can come in and enjoy that environment and experience the quality of these type of buildings in that environment. And then also realizing that this quality is not compromised in any way, or the energy performance does not compromise the quality of the building, quite the opposite, that this outstanding quality can be achieved at a minimum of the energy and carbon emissions from a normal building. The transfer of knowledge is a key thing, and the lessons learned, good and bad, needs to be shared. We need to share what went wrong. We need especially to share these aspects of construction projects where things didn't go to plan, so that others don't fall into the same trap. And this is key with these kind of elements as well, and these kind of presentations like today. Contractors need greater training and experience in managing risk on site. This is a key aspect there as well, and this is to reduce costs, because where contractors perceive a risk, they will add cost to it to deal with it at some point. And we need cost data for passive house projects, and this cost data needs to be more sophisticated, because quite often passive house projects, they're not just passive house projects, they also excel on other levels of quality. When a client commits to this, it's just one of the t-shirts they're keen to get for this one as well, especially when you work for political clients or clients who also seek a political capital payback, essentially from investing into these kind of projects. They also want outstanding nature performance, wildlife performance, maybe in there, healthy building performance, and these elements in there, security, safety, and so on. And of course, all these aspects add cost to the project, but quite often is then pooled into one element, the passive house swimming pool, for example. And it was the passive house element that drove the cost, and this is often not true. We need to have more representative costs and broken down in these elements in there. And the marketability of passive house needs to include the wider social, financial, environmental, and health benefits to better from clients. So it's not just about the energy performance of a building that we achieve in here and the reduction in carbon emissions that we in theory achieve with these buildings, but we need to promote as well the real comfort, air quality, health, and well-being benefits from passive house environments, not just in terms of commercial buildings, but also in particular residential buildings, what we can achieve for the weakest members of our society, but also in terms of quality environments for these very public buildings that we all come and enjoy and use on these buildings. And that takes us to the end. Thank you very much. And whenever you come to Exeter, please do pay the pool a visit and experience the environment for yourself.
Thanks so much, Thomas and Emma, for that. Now we have a few questions in the Q&A, which we might run through, and if there's any others, speak now or pop it into the Q&A chat if you wouldn't mind. So we have a few coming through. First one we have is from Nathan in Queens. Could you explain how the payback period is calculated, and was this carried out by the design team / client, or as part of a separate appointment early on, or in the project development? And my own experience, we are seeing issues with simple payback, in inverted commas, calculations for showing value for money in decision making. I'd appreciate any insights.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick that up. Yeah, so we did use, Thomas mentioned, we did use specialist leisure consultants very early on, particularly to help us to develop and evolve that client brief. You know, we didn't want just a great leisure building. We wanted one that really worked first and foremost and was an effective facility and sort of met the city needs. So our business case was originally sort of dealt with all the usual key inputs. So looking at, you know, the likely numbers that would be visiting. All the estimates were based on obviously a building regulation compliant building. And I think what we've been able to prove that whilst the original modelling was based on a 10% cost premium and a payback by year 10, the reality has been that obviously I talked about attendance being more than double anticipated from the business plan. So we've got 1.3 instead of 500,000 visitors per year. That's obviously enhanced some of our membership uptake. In terms of the energy efficiency and the 50% reduction in water usage and the like, obviously we've got a real cost saving in terms of energy. I think if we compare the energy use of this particular building, and we heat the building principally through gas, we do have the provision for the building to be connected up to the district heating network when it reaches the city centre, but for now it operates off gas boilers. And certainly on a like-for-like basis, we have another city centre, leisure centre, about 3 or 2 miles away. The costs for heating the building, and this is a substantially larger building, are about 25%. So 25% of the cost of the other building. So we've easily got a 75% reduction in costs. And in terms of the overall cost of the building, so if you were to look at it like for like based on 2022 costs, this particular development cost 34 million in terms of the main contract sum. There was a further 8 million of on costs, so the total bill package was 42 million. It's a 6,000 square metre building, so that equates from a bill cost perspective £5,700 per square metre, all in close to £7,000 per square metre. But it does fall within some of the cost parameters of similar facilities that are non-passive house. So back in 2022, when we were looking at the business case, a standard designed leisure facility, you'd be paying anything between £3,000 and £4,500 per square metre. For high spec leisure, you'd be paying anything between £4,500 to £6,000. So even in those days, when we were looking at passive house, we were very much comparing it with a non-passive house but high specification leisure facility.
Good. Thanks, Emma. I had a follow-up question in relation to the scope of post-occupancy and evaluation on completion, and particularly elements related to the passive house. Are there any insights you can share in relation to that stage of the project post-completion?
Yeah, Thomas, I don't know if you've got any more information. We haven't, because I no longer work for Exeter City Council, but I don't think, whilst we put some monitoring equipment within the building, I think we've had pretty limited post-completion monitoring data. But I don't know, Thomas, if you've got any further insight into that.
Yeah, so we have some monitoring data about the performance of that pool. and that was carried out by the Passivhaus Institute in Germany. So they had a 12-month contract to help with the handover process essentially, and during these 12 months monitor the performance of the various energy elements of that pool, the hot water side, the heating side, pool filtration side, and these kind of elements in there. With the main aspect of this was to help fine-tune the pool performance, identify any issues around that they might find around these kind of elements in there, and then also advise on the sort of correct application of these kind of figures in there. Generally, in the first year, the pool didn't quite perform to the aspired sort of 70% energy saving that we were, was to the energy targets that we were set on there, but we were not far off. I think it was something like 5%, 7%, something like that in that region, and that was mainly down to some issues around pool hole ventilation and some of the filtration systems in there as well. We had an issue with one of the heat pumps as well, not working for a major part of the first year. These kind of things, elements that you would expect with these kind of complex buildings in terms of the setting of the BMS and these kind of systems. They were, as far as I'm aware, then ironed out within the first year or after the first year, very much. So the building now, as far as I'm aware, performs quite close to the intended performance targets.
Yes. Sorry, I'm difficulty sharing the link, but again, on Passipedia, I can see the researcher referring to Thomas in relation to Sidwell's point, Leisure Centre 1 year of in-use energy performance. Perhaps a Google on that, and we'll be able to share the link. Might help. And Lindsay, we have a question here in relation to the form of contract that was used to deliver the scheme, part one, and the second part. You said the council took on the risk of a PH design / certification as no contractor would. So was that in the form of the council paying the cost for any additional works needed and delays, or how is that managed, I suppose, particularly in relation to the air tightness target?
Okay, I mean,
recollect that part
yeah,
of the process.
Thomas and I could probably do double act on this, so I'll do the easy bit. So it was it was kind of a bastardized form of a design and build contract. It was bastardized because we'd undertaken quite a lot of the design up front. So Thomas was involved with part of that design development. So when we went out to tender, it was with a high degree of the design sort of done, which I can't remember which stage it would have been in those days. Would it have been C?
It was probably D. Yeah.
D. So the design was quite well established, and because again through the Passivhaus certification route, we have to take the design through the PHPP. So we knew even at that point that the design was capable of delivering a certified Passivhaus building. So there was a level of high degree of comfort client side. I think from a contractor's perspective, Kier had no experience of Passivhaus, I believe, up to that point, or very limited experience. And because they hadn't been on the journey of the design development, they basically had a reluctance to take on the design. I guess they didn't believe that it would meet certification, whereas we knew the design team and we had every confidence in our design and consultancy team. So what we did from a client's perspective was we obviously novated most of the team across to Kier, but we held back the best. So Thomas was held back client side. So Thomas then formed part of the sort of client technical monitoring team. And in many respects, what we sought to do was to create a culture with Kier, the main contractor, that was very much teamwork. So whilst Thomas was kind of the police for us from a client's perspective, actually Thomas really went on site, undertook a number of inspections and really transferred a lot of his knowledge and experience, having been involved with the design and how the design was developed. And so that kind of countered a lot of the sort of fears and risks. Thomas, do you want to add anything more really from the contract and contract setup?
A key aspect was also having the Passivhaus certifier engaged early on in that process. The Passivhaus certifier on this project was the Passivhaus Institute, and their role was sort of twofold. One, to certify the building upon completion, of course, set the targets for this swimming pool because it's a non-standard building, but then also bring their experience from the first two pools and the monitoring studies they carried out on these two pools, so that we don't start from scratch, but make best use of this knowledge that was gained already with this pioneering projects there as well. But before contract award, the fabric design was essentially fully developed in there, as well as the ventilation, filtration, and the heating design for this building. So that that was then assessed by the Passivhaus Institute, and the Passivhaus Institute set further targets for individual aspects of that design, as well as airtightness targets specifically for that project, but also what, in terms of performance targets, need to be achieved for each system, ventilation, filtration, and so on this element in here. So that when then the contractor supply design was developed, we had specific targets that they need to be fulfilled, and where the Passivhaus Institute as a certifier then actually vetted that against this original report that was part of that contract. And so then through this assessment process, through the supply design development, but also on site, that then sort of informed the design decision, and to be fair, a very collaborative approach with the contractor as well in terms of achieving the target. So it was that transparency and this working together there on these sites that really drove it. Where then our role was to provide some further checks on site, how the element is developed, where there's sort of some risks in these kind of aspects there as well, the components that they're actually sort of used on site, and they're also installed to the quality that we needed them to be installed on site, and working with the contractor to achieve that on site very much.
Thanks very much. And we'll sneak in one last question, I think, from Emer before we wrap up. Can you explain St. Sidwell's maintenance journey, how that evolves since the client contractor handover? Did the PHIT standard fit neatly into SFG 20 ppm schedule?
Oh, these are really hard questions. I mean, the maintenance journey has been pretty intense, and I would say there's been quite an extended handover period in terms of Kiers' involvement and their subcontractors on the building. I think I can say with confidence they've kind of now handed over, but we extended the defects liability period from what normally is 12 months to 2 years. And I think we then pushed out even further because there were some teething issues, particularly with the M&E. I don't know what SFG G20 ppm is, and I'm not an M&E specialist. But being a user of the facility most days, generally speaking, it seems to be working pretty well. And indeed, I've kind of seen improvements over time. Yeah, I don't know, Thomas, if you can, I know you're an architect, not an M&E, but what we can do is we can perhaps give you a link to one of our M&E consultants that were involved in the project, who is a font of all knowledge on that side of things.
I mean, just to add to that, the swimming pool is still owned by Exeter City Council, and they operate the pool, including the maintenance of this swimming pool building, as with all the other facilities. So they don't have an out-of-house operator for this pool, and they have their in-house team. The team was very involved in the handover process of the pool building as well, including training, of course, on all the components and the services side of things. And to be fair, considering that the building actually has double the visitors that was envisaged or that was designed for, it is an incredible shape in there, not just in terms of the building itself, but also in terms of the environment, the swimming pool environment, challenging places like changing areas, these kind of things, but also in terms of the water quality and air quality that the building maintains at very minimal chlorine and chemical levels, which the operations teams achieves on this side. But yeah, as Emma said, we can probably get some feedback there from Exeter's maintenance team as well, if you like. Yeah,
It'd be kind of interesting to see, I suppose, over and above, and the maintenance that would be expected, or the planned maintenance that would be expected, if there was anything in particular, and we could maybe circulate that after, if there's anything of note. I suppose we'll wrap up now. We're a minute over. So I suppose on behalf of the Passivhaus Association Ireland and the Passivhaus Trust, I'd like to thank Thomas and Emma for sharing their experience and expertise with us today. Also to Fiona Flack and Anne-Marie Fowling for helping to set us up, and Barry McCartney's on the call also. And we'd like to encourage you, suppose, to visit the Passive House Association of Ireland, phai.ie, and the passivhousetrust.org.uk websites. So to keep an eye on our socials for details of future events, and maybe you might consider signing up if you're not a member already. So see you at the third webinar of the series in the coming weeks. So thanks very much. Thanks again, Emma and Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yes.